Hello and welcome to the Unlearning series from iShield.ai. Today we are going to talk about ageism in workplace. And joining me today is Ashton Applewhite. She is the author of This Chair Rocks, a Manifesto Against Ageism. And she's the co-founder of Old School Anti-Ageism Clearinghouse. She's an internationally recognized expert on ageism, speaks widely at venues that have included the TED main stage and the United Nations. She has written for Harper's, The Guardian, and the New York, and is the voice of Yo, this ageist. Ashton is at the forefront of emerging movement to raise awareness of ageism and to dismantle it. Welcome, Ashton, to the show. Thank you very much for joining us.
Delighted to be here.
Thank you. One of the things about ageism that struck me was when I read an article that you wrote, and you mentioned that ageism is defined as a bias against our future selves. That really kind of was very striking. I also felt that is relevant to each one of us, irrespective of what age that you're in. And also when I started observing that this phenomena a little bit more, I also got a sense that this is prevalent, probably the most prevalent form of bias in workplace.
Yeah, because everyone ages.
Yeah, correct. And but also something that's an issue that gets the least attention.
I hope to change that.
Yeah. So I want to just get a sense of how serious is this problem of ageism at workplaces, and why do we need to tackle this now?
So many answers. The problem with aging and ageism is that because it is the universal human experience, there is no domain to which it's not relevant. So everything can go in 100 different directions. The problem of ageism is something every human encounters. Ageism is we're being ageist anytime we make an assumption about someone or a group of people based on how old we think they are. The workplace is often the first place people encounter ageism or become aware of it, especially white men who may not have, who haven't encountered racism or sexism. And it is an enormous problem for a number of reasons. The sort of overarching reason is that we are living in a world of longer lives. Everywhere in the world, India, the US, Western Europe, people are living longer. So we need to think differently about longevity in order to take advantage of the longevity economy, as it's called, the longevity dividend, which is the social and economic capital of hundreds and millions more healthy, well-educated adults than ever before in human history. The biggest obstacle to that is ageism. That's why the World Health Organization launched a global anti-ageism campaign last year. And in the workplace, it is impoverishing both fiscally and personally. I get heartrending emails from people almost every day who are enormously well qualified for work and are unable to find employment simply because of how old they are. And the biggest problem is, if older people are forced out of the workplace, who's going to support us? This is not an old person problem. Every older person has younger people who love them and care about them and who are going to have to support them if we can't support ourselves. And the cost to the global economy, the AARP did a study about the cost of workplace ageism to the United States, and I don't remember the figure for 2019, but they said that at this rate, by 2050, the cost to the US GDP alone will be equivalent to the gross national product of Germany.
Wow.
So it is in the many billions. Globally, it is in the trillions. There is an unprecedented global labor shortage. There is a solution. I mean, it's never as simple as there's one solution, but all these incredibly qualified older people who are eager to work, hungry to work, and qualified to work.
Yeah, absolutely. Does the ageism problem accentuate when combined with issues like, let's say, gender or other types of, let's say, when grouped with, let's say, other types of minority subgroups?
Great question. The answer is yes. We know from this idea of intersectionality that all these forms of bias are intersecting systems that inform and compound each other. So there's a famous study for, I think the National Bureau, I don't want to say the study. I want to say that my blog is thischairrocks.com/blog. You can search it by topic and see all the things I've written and find the original sources. But educated white men can't get employed. If you are an educated white woman, you faced higher obstacles. And there was a huge study where they sent out, I think, 14,000 resumes, and all they did was change John to Jacqueline, or I don't know what the Indian equivalent would be, forgive me. And women got far fewer callbacks. If they change your name in the US to a African American name, even fewer, because people are racist in addition to being ageist and sexist. If you have a disability, it is even higher. So all these struggles are interconnected. The good news is that if you work against ageism, against racism, for example, you are making the world less ageist, because so many Black and brown people don't get old at all. If you work in the rights of equal employment for women, you are being anti-ageist, because the older a woman is, the harder a time she has in getting opportunities to be employed, and so on. So all these struggles are connected, these layers of oppression, but so is activism, right? If we chip away against any form of bias, we chip away at the fear and ignorance that underlie them all. That's why I love, I have to say, the name of your series. It is about unlearning. And unlearning is really hard. None of this is easy, especially when it comes to values. The first critical step, and I'm sure you've talked about this on other episodes, is to look at your own attitudes and think about where they come from. But it's doable, and we have the tools.
Yep. Thank you. The one aspect about workplace and inclusion is today in any company, we have all three generations of people working together at the same time. But there is a research that almost 1 in 4 workers of age 45 and older have been subjected to negative comments, or people who are aged 45 plus face stereotyping at workplaces from their younger peers. So how does these stereotypes in a workplace manifest, and what are the kind of things that are accepted or have not been addressed at a workplace?
All right. Well, let me tackle the first part of that question, by which time I will have forgotten the second part, so you'll have to remind me. Ageism cuts both ways, right? It is any judgment on the basis of age, and it can include that you are too young. In a youth-oriented society, which I think is I know that it is more acute in the United States than India, where there is more age integration in communities and households. Older people bear the brunt of it, but when you think of a young person, I mean, I remember being in the hospital a long time ago and looking around, and it seemed like every doctor around the bed was about 14, and I was like, I'm being ageist. I'm sure they're incredibly well qualified, which they were. So it can work both ways. It can be an older person assuming that this young person on the team couldn't possibly know what they're doing. So it's any judgment. And the goal is a mixed age team. The goal is mixed gender team, mixed race, so that we can have a diversity of opinions and experience. And we know from research in the workplace that diverse teams make better money, make better decisions, and that diverse teams are better places to work. You talk about generations. Like everyone else in the world, I am on a mission to get people to use that word less and to try and avoid thinking in generational terms, because there is no scientific basis whatsoever for the term, except in the sense that my children are a separate generation from me, and I am a separate generation. But that is the only definition of generation that scientists agree on. It is obviously preposterous to suggest that all the billions of people in the world born between a certain time period that no one agrees on what the time period is share a set of attributes or characteristics. But marketers love the term, demographers love the term. We love to talk about generations because it's convenient. But when we think of someone, when we label a colleague as a member of a generation, instantly stereotypes about that group. Millennials, they're so disloyal was a big one. Now we can blame that on Generation Z, when in fact, when we were that age, we changed jobs all the time too, because that's what you do in your 20s and 30s till you figure out your path. It's not a function of when you were born. It's a function of how old you happen to be. So the minute we have a habit of attributing problems to age gaps, partly because we live in an age segregated society, when typically in the workforce, age has much less to do with what people want. Everyone wants flex time. Millennials didn't invent that. Everyone wants personal days. Everyone is learning to prioritize mental health. It might be annoying as an older worker to see your younger colleagues leaving work early to go to the gym, because that's not something you did when you were their age. But times change. It is healthier to prioritize your physical and mental well-being. And it doesn't have to do with the age of the person. I would like to take the whole idea. It is lucrative. There is a whole lucrative industry of generational consulting, and they make their living by saying Gen X is different from Gen Y in A, B, C, D, E. There's no evidence that that's the case. I've written about this. The Harvard Business Review did a fantastic series of articles about how generational thinking is bad for employers and employees. So think of your colleagues as older and younger. Try to use those words instead of referring to them as being boomers or millennials or whatever.
That also points to the importance of language that we use at workplace. Also, language is emerging. For example, if you just take pronouns and how they have emerged into usage in workplace, or we used to talk about abbreviations. Now there is a difference. I think there is a need to take everybody along when these new languages and phrases emerge. Is there anything that companies can do to? Otherwise, they could lead to discrimination also at the same time, that, oh, you don't know this, kind of a syndrome.
Yes, and then we get into cancel culture, which is that you didn't use the right pronoun for me, so therefore you are homophobic, so therefore I can't work with you. Back to your unlearning idea, these language reflects habits of thought, and language reflects culture. And we are all shaped by the culture in which we live and the corporate culture or organizational culture in which we work. And we have to, if we want to, no one has to learn anything, right? I'm not in the you should do this business, because this is really complicated and we each need to negotiate these things in our own way. And language is changeable, and there are no absolute right answers. A really good rule of thumb about pronouns is ask someone what they want to be called, and then try and remember it. My daughter does management consulting, and she said, if you're not good at names, try harder. I forget names instantly, but you know what? If that person was in charge of my next promotion, I would remember their 17-syllable long Thai name or Sri Lankan name, right? It sounds funny. Well, your name sounds funny to them. Try harder. That's mainly a dig at Americans, I have to admit. But when it comes to pronouns, I hear people, saying, why do I have to? And they makes me uncomfortable. You don't have to. But if you don't make an effort to stay current, you will forfeit the opportunity to contribute as an equal. And it is respectful to try and call someone what they want to be called and refer to them in the ways that they would like you to. It's why I put, she, her after my name. I happen to have a name that is a man's name in England always, and typically in America. You're looking at me, you can probably tell I'm a girl, but maybe not. That was ageist, I should say woman, and an older woman. But I do that as a courtesy to the people with less power than me, with less visibility than me, as an act of solidarity. It costs me nothing to put she, her there. I have a close colleague who is trans. Every so often, I still call them he, which may or may not have been what the word they used when I first met them, but I try really hard to use they, even though it's a hiccup and I have to unlearn my old ways of thinking because it's respectful. So I think employers should encourage simply, to find out what people want to be called, how they want to be addressed, and then ask the employees to do their best in respecting that choice.
Yeah, I agree. We conducted a research on just awareness of pronouns, global audience.
What did you learn?
So you brought up the point of culture, right? I just wanted to say that 9 out of 10 people we interviewed, let's say in countries like India and in Asia, they didn't even know what a pronoun was. So they always ask,
is the language gendered? Because I know in Chinese there aren't male and female nouns and stuff.
No, it's not that. It's just that they didn't know why people put he, him, or in their names.
I see.
They just didn't know what does that stand for. Why are they doing this?
Mm-hmm.
But the recognition and awareness of that problem, or not problem, that's the recognition and awareness of use of pronouns
Mm-hmm.
much higher when we interviewed people, let's say in the US and in Europe, where almost 8 out of 10 people at least knew why that was being used.
Mm-hmm.
So if you put a bunch of people from India, people from UK, people from US and work together,
Mm-hmm.
there is also a necessity that the company makes a conscious effort to educate people around this sensitivity. To assume that somebody would know also can cause barriers.
Very, very good point. And I remember, I'm not a big expert on gender stuff. I remember thinking, gee, I should probably start doing that, but literally Googling, like putting your pronouns and reading a couple of articles, which basically say to queer people or trans people, it's really, really, really important. So if you think that they deserve respect, do it as a gesture of solidarity with them, because it doesn't cost you, and it costs them when they are misgendered.
I want to move on to another topic, which is age bias in recruitment. So we do at iShield, we do a degree of inclusion report where we analyze all recruitment communications and to understand how inclusive are they. And what we've realized is that almost 30% of all job descriptions has age bias language. A simple one could be, a simple one is, we are looking for a young and dynamic business analyst, right? Now,
or even leave out the young, just dynamic. That's code for young, because the assumption is that older people haven't had a new idea in 10 years.
Yeah. And the impact when we measure, there are companies where we try to measure, okay, if you change the language, what happens? And we see that when you put this, there is a drop of applications, almost 25 to 30%. But when you change the language, then the application rate goes up.
Well, good for you for studying that. That's fantastic.
Yeah. So I wanted to touch about, to talk a little bit about how does age bias in recruitment manifest, and what examples have you come across, and what can brands do about this?
Right. Well, it starts with the job description, as you just mentioned. Digital native is another one. I mean, probably the one huge stereotype that older people are up against is that we don't have fresh ideas. If you were to have done the same job for 30 years and no one has offered you training and no one has offered you, ways to move up, then you might not have any new ideas because you're bored silly and are sort of stagnating. But there's no truth to that. Older entrepreneurs are more likely to be successful, blah, blah, blah. Another is that we are not technically competent. Older people will learn, just like younger people, whatever tool it is they need to communicate and hold on to their jobs. There's no truth to if you think about the massive technological transformations in the global workplace since I was born, and I was born in 1952, email didn't exist, texting didn't exist. Think about Slack, about Microsoft Teams, about Zoom. Who are the people that have brought these workforces ahead with and literally trained employees globally around the world in how to use these technologies? The older workers who've been on staff for a while. So it's patently untrue and unfair. a huge obstacle in hiring is recruiting. It's using coded words like energetic or dynamic for young, and it can work the other way, seasoned or requiring a certain number of years of experience.
Yeah.
That's a way to shut younger people out. Any language in the workplace as well, that refers to age simply should be cut out. And we know how to do this around race. We know how to do this around gender. It's not a different skill set. Age is, I'm not saying these forms of discrimination are the same, but we know that, it's sort of a basic litmus test. If I use similar language or asked a similar question on the basis of race or sex, would it be okay? It's not okay to do it on the basis of age either. Another huge barrier is in HR itself. There was a recent study, and if you look at my social media, on Twitter or Facebook, This Chair Rocks is the name of my group, you will see that I post all this research. So if you want to just skim that down, you will find all these primary sources, or on my blog, a study of, I don't remember how many HR people, I believe it was US based, that showed that although they said that their older hires performed as well or better than younger hires, they still were reluctant to hire older people because of their bias. And we need to do real training of HR around that. I mean, I hear countless stories of older people who send out hundreds of resumes and never even get an answer. And then if they land an interview, the interview is often over the minute they walk in the door or turn on their camera, before they have even had a chance to say a word, which is so soul-sucking and disheartening and terrible. I just want to reference an experiment that a European orchestra did, because they noticed that it was mostly, shocker, old white men playing the instruments, and they wanted to diversify. So they put a curtain between the instrument and the people who were doing the hiring. And then they added a carpet, so they couldn't tell how much the person weighed or what kind of shoes they were wearing. And sure enough, the orchestra diversified, because the people doing the hiring, they couldn't, their unconscious biases could not click into place if they didn't have the information. So what HR people and the people who hire the HR people need to do, and we know from diversity and inclusion track records, that if the people at the top don't buy in, nothing happens. So they have to unlearn their own biases and implement these changes at the highest level of corporate leadership as well. But is to put that mental curtain down and think, if I didn't know what color this person was, how much they weighed, how old they were, what do they bring to the job? Are they the best qualified person? Because ideally, that is what the decision would be based on.
Absolutely. One of the startling numbers that I read was only 8% of all diversity and inclusion efforts in a company actually even talks about ageism. So there is, I think, a need to consciously recognize this.
You think?
Also, there is no I have not actually read a framework that a diversity and inclusion leader can pick up on, say, okay, we are tackling gender, we are tackling race. How do we tackle ageism? What does it mean from a recruitment process standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, it's, age diversity is essential for employers, just like every other kind of diversity. Diverse teams make better decisions and work better, and the diverse companies are better to work at. I want people to know about a website called the Old School Clearinghouse, the Old School Anti-Ageism Clearinghouse. The URL is oldschool.info, which is a collection of hundreds of carefully vetted anti-ageism resources. What is ageism? What does it look like? What can we do about it? And there are tons of resources that address language, and there are some in a corporate context, some in a personal context. Both matter. when you're talking around the proverbial water cooler, if there even are water coolers anymore. And also, terrific stuff from AARP, from the Stanford Longevity Institute for reports on what ageism in the workplace looks like, the damage it does, and how to correct it. Obviously, one thing you can do is to ask about DEI initiatives, and if age is missing, ask why. Because it is intuitively and politically and strategically and economically obvious that age diversity is a benefit and that age is a criterion for diversity. I am optimistic about this because I think it's a much once people because people have gotten the big memo, which is you need diversity.
Yes.
So to hitch age to that list is a much smaller ask than saying, yo, it's not okay that y'all are a bunch of white guys. People understand whether or not they have unlearned it and whether or not they're simply playing lip service, that it doesn't look good to be a bunch of white guys. So the big task of putting that idea in the culture has already been done. It is our job to make sure that age inclusion and age equity is part of the process. And I also want to mention an organization called the Age Equity Alliance, which specializes in helping companies be age equitable in their policies and practices.
Fantastic. So somebody actually asked that, can you put the URL in the chat? I think in the end we will do that.
I will.
Both the resources that you mentioned.
I can't type and talk at the same time one of these days. I don't think it's because I'm old. I don't think I could do it when I was young.
No, we'll make sure that we send the URL out. The other aspect about workplace, in the same degree of inclusion report that we generated, we looked at apparel brands and their marketing content, right? These are top apparel brands and marketing content. And we did a simple classification of what is the representation of people 45 plus in all their social media marketing communications, right? Images. And only 3%, the representation of people who are 45 plus is 3% across these sports apparel brands, right?
It was sports apparel?
Sports apparel. I'm just talking specifically about sports apparel brands, right? And that is in contrast to whether it is purchase, the percentage of product that is purchased by people. It is in contrast to even the ask from people saying that, hey, we would, almost 70% people said we would love ads that represented us. So it is in stark contrast to I think they're missing out on an opportunity.
No kidding. I mean, older people have more purchasing power than younger people by far. And I mean, and I can't even finish this sentence, which was you might make a case that older people are less physically active, but I don't think that's true. We understand now that being physically active is an incredibly important component of aging well. We do participate less in extreme sports, but how much, rock climbing gear do they sell? Right? It's not that much. So, I mean, I think you've put your finger on a huge problem, which is ageism in the advertising business. Almost all executives are younger. And it is, if you want to know what any group wants, whether it's people who love parakeets or people who have vision impairment or people who rock climb, talk to them, right? So if your employee base is young and know people who represent that interest group, I'm not saying you should go hire a lot of people who own parakeets, but round up some parakeet owners and ask what they want and need. And older people are excluded from this conversation, which once again makes no sense because of our purchasing power. I will point out also that back to unlearning, one ugly paradox of selling to older people is that ageism takes root in age denial. This weird, this idea, prejudice against your future selves, which by the way is not my personal idea. It's an idea that lots of people have arrived at on their own. I believe a scholar named Todd Nelson was the first to put it in print. All prejudice requires an out group, an other, a group that you define yourself in opposition to and see as other or lesser than yourselves. The weird thing about ageism is that the other is our own future older selves. A lot of people are really reluctant, therefore, to identify as older. I mean, I'm always amazed. I will be in a group that's all about, Ageland, where at least half the people have more road behind them than ahead, and they are still talking about older people as them. And I'm like,
Yeah.
dudes, hello, it's us, it's not them. So marketers do have a legitimate challenge in that a lot of older people don't want to identify as older and don't want to buy things marketed at older people. But because it's like playing tennis, there's really not much that there is no such thing as clothes for old people. There's no such thing as sports for old people. Old
Yeah.
people are just older versions of the younger people they used to be, that for the most part have the same interests and activities and inclinations. They may not be able to do the thing the same way they did when they were younger, but they can do versions of it. So you don't have to make like baggy, lumpy, shapeless clothes for old women,
Yeah.
because guess what? I'm not going to buy them because they're lumpy, ugly, and shapeless. And also, I mean, I actually I'd go see what it's like. But an awful lot of people, if you put old or age, whatever in front of it, they're like, ick, because of their internalized ageism. And one more point on that. A lot of that really has nothing to do with age. It has to do with accessibility,
Yeah.
right? It has to do with physical capacity, rather than how old the consumer happens to be.
Yeah, I mean, I found that 3% really, at least I felt not uncomfortable with it, because I'm part of a football group and I'm 45. And we all, we play active football, we purchase products, and there is not one advertisement that
Right.
shows,
It's not
playing.
as though the younger team on the other field is wearing different clothes.
Yeah, yeah. So, okay. The one aspect, and I have been exposed to this in recent times, where I have seen ageism in workplaces, venture capital funding, right? And there is a lot of research, and there is a famous accelerator, a venture capital accelerator in the US, who says that put large fonts. All your investors are probably old; they can't see. This is in their instructions, right? They can't see, they may not be able to hear you properly. So make sure that your font size is 150 plus or something like that. But I think in any large auditorium, having a font size big is important, irrespective of stereotyping
Exactly.
as they cannot see. There is this one aspect. The other one is, there is also research that once a founder entrepreneur crosses a 36, age bias starts in venture
Yeah.
capital funding. So I believe they are missing out on a huge opportunity.
There was, I'm
What
sure
have you?
big studies, and another really big one that showed that it is entrepreneurs over the age of 45 that have the highest levels of success. Now, I'm sure there are 22-year-olds with brilliant ideas. It's never about older being better than younger or younger better than older. It is to look at the characteristics of the individual, but older people have more experience and more networks, broader networks. So those are inherent advantages. The business, it's not so, it's ageist and ableist, which is to say prejudiced on the basis of physical capacity, to say, oh, those old people, they can't see anything. Now, it is true. It is a fact that vision and hearing decline with age. Different rates for different people. You can't say lots of people in their 50s need hearing aids and some 80-year-olds don't. But it is a courtesy to everyone in the world to have a font that is readable. I personally would like the type on, I was taking an antihistamine this morning, and the font on the bottle, it's like 4-point. I could not read it, which is just maddening.
Yeah.
And it's not as though people of a given age take antihistamines or look at websites. This is the premise of universal design, that if you make a door that is easy to open, or you can open with your elbow, which was handy during the main pandemic, everyone benefits. Everyone is, whether you're pushing a stroller or a cart or a delivery wagon or a medical gurney, a door that opens and that is wide is good for everyone. And of course, when these changes become ubiquitous, they drop their stigma associated with disability. I mean, it's unfortunate that that's what it takes. So if you think about it as being able to reach everyone and of leveling the playing field, you achieve a bigger consumer base, and you don't alienate people. I mean, I just had the very, very unhappy making experience of seeing a movie. We were late. It was a small screen. We were way in the back, and the subtitles were so small and went by so fast. I do not have great eyes. I have to say, I was born blind as a bat. But that's probably bad to bats. See there, that I'm going to get a letter from the Bat Protection Society saying I was just batist. But it was very disheartening. They went by really. My partner could see them, but I could not read them fast enough to see them. And I was like, oh, crap. Now, is that ageist? Is it ableist? It would be better if we didn't have to ask that question, but they made the fonts big enough that anyone could see, so you don't feel like crap if you can't read them.
Yeah, absolutely. If the instruction was, use large fonts so everybody could see it clearly, that's enough. Rather than saying, oh, there are old people.
Exactly.
That's where I think the use of, again, coming back to language.
Exactly.
What's the right,
that is inclusion.
Yeah, absolutely. The
just one other point, for decades, people with disabilities have been asking for employers to initiate the kind of changes to technical and policy changes that enabled people to work remotely. Once the health of the world population was at risk, magically, those changes became possible. And it is incumbent on all of us to support employers in keeping those changes permanent so that people with disabilities who do not have the option of going into work can continue to participate as equals in the workplace.
Yeah. Also, one positive thing is there is a definite talent crunch, and that also is putting adequate pressure on every enterprise to for whether it is remote working or hybrid working or inclusion. I think both of these now are critical for even survival.
I should hope so.
Yeah. In the workplace, one aspect I also want to touch about, workplace and ageism is product development. So I'm a software engineer by profession, and every week we review user guides and user stories that we write, and typically the user persona, and we have just done an analysis of user personas that people write in product descriptions.
Oh, how interesting.
Right? There is 1% representation. Like the user is always over-indexed. It's a male over-indexed than female.
Yeah.
Age, again, over-indexed on a certain age group. They're always in their 20s, right? And so there are implicit biases even in the user persona that you develop, right?
Probably because it's a young man in his 20s writing the guide.
We haven't. That's interesting. We actually didn't point it back to who is writing it.
Yeah.
But
or maybe not, or just because we know these things become self-reinforcing systems. The likeliest, demographic for code, is I guess not just white guys, but also, of course, a huge South Asian number of people in the computer industry, but everyone else. It's funny. It brings to mind a friend of mine who is in her early 50s, and she identifies as a lesbian. And she said in the beginning of her career, she was all about, look how young I am, but hid the fact that she was not straight. And now it's like totally great to be a lesbian, but she sort of mumbles her age because now that's a disadvantage.
Yeah.
Can't win for losing.
How this user stereotype has impacted is, my uncle is a very decorated doctor in India. And as he got older, he was very active researcher. He just wanted a speech to text converter.
Mm-hmm.
And he must have tried 20 softwares. None of them was built for him to easily adopt or access.
Well, luckily you're his nephew and you can make one.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, he had to, all that he resorted was he got a good assistant who could type for him on his behalf. So when you
But
have,
it shouldn't be like that. It should be available and it should be free, as I'm sure you know.
yeah, I
And
mean,
there's a market for it.
for his work habit, he actually used to wake up at 2 a.m. and work till 4:30. And you can't get an assistant to come and work with you at that time.
Right.
That's really why he wanted the software. But it, even in design, it is biased.
Is that that's a beautiful example. Is that a big software challenge?
It is a usability challenge. Like, how easy have you made it to install, to use? And you assume a lot of things that people would know. And some people may not know that, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
Maybe in the users, if you actually had a better representation of the user groups whom you are targeting to, and if you had at least one user profile persona where you
Right.
then you
And
would have.
there we've come full circle to involve the end users in the design of the product and in the writing of the instructions for how to do it, because it is imperative that people with disabilities be involved in consulting about software and product design, some of whom will be older and some of whom will be younger.
Absolutely. So I want to, before we take any questions that have come up, I want to come back to what DEI teams at companies can do to make a start. If there are a few things that you want to talk about, how can they get started? Of course, it starts with recognition, but I would love to hear from you so that we can, if you could summarize that.
Sure.
And I will take a few questions.
As the saying goes, and it was probably some brilliant Swami in India who said it, all change starts within. No large-scale change happens without unlearning on an individual level. So the most important step, and of course it's especially important that the people at the top do this and do it sincerely with the effort, with the desire to change, is to look at our own attitudes towards age and aging, because we are all biased. We have been barraged with negative messages about aging from birth. They become part of our identity unless we stop to challenge them. These are new ideas to most people, and we can't undo bias unless we are aware of it. And most people, age is still under our radar. From a collective point of view, there are, of course, a million answers. Go to the old school Clearinghouse and look at all the reports, the webinars, the podcasts, the workshops that give tangible tools in hiring and in policy and practice for how to address this. I would say that the most important thing you can do overall is to look around at the people on the team and the people who work for you. And if they all look the same in any way, ask why. Whether they are all men, whether they are all from India, whether they are all young. And if age diversity is not on the menu, not on the radar, say, what about age? That's a really simple question. It's also a really good rejoinder when you encounter ageism, because those microaggressions, oh, did you just start here? Or are you planning to retire? Those are not okay. No. Those are not any casual reference to age, even if you don't mean it to be offensive. Really good all-purpose rejoinder. What do you mean by that?
Yeah.
If someone says we can't find any old people, really, what do you mean by that? Press not in an aggressive way, but ask people to dig deeper, because this stuff is entrenched and we need to change it, especially in a world of longer lives.
Absolutely. And if you don't ask that question, then that phrase will be used for you tomorrow or somewhere.
Yeah, there's a phrase by a management consultant named Amy Gallo, and I came across it. She's written a bunch of really good articles in the Harvard Business Review about how generational stereotypes and framing is harming employers and harming employees. Excuse me. And she says that when there's a conflict in the workplace that appears to be age-related, it helps to try and find common ground and empathy. And she says to herself, that was me, that will be me, right? Depending on whether it's an older or younger colleague. We are all on this journey. It's hard to be young. It's much harder. Your 20s are a lot harder than your 60s. I'm about to embark on my 70s. And it reminds us that being young is hard. And it reminds us that we will turn into an older person if we are lucky.
Thank you. We have a question from the audience. Uh, this is from Konenika Patil. She says, how can we remove implicit ageism bias for our co-workers in the workplace?
Thank you for that good question. None of us can remove bias from anyone else. Of course, that has to be, it is a hard task, and we each individually have to commit to it. But one thing we can do is to call out ageism when we see it. I think there's we have. I'm not saying that ageism is like racism or the same as racism or sexism, but in the US, and of course now we have the internet, so all these resources are available globally. There were a ton of posts about how to support a Black or brown colleague or a woman, because of the whole movement around harassment. Women in the workplace, of how to stand up for someone when you see them being the target of ageism. I would look at those articles. I would go to the old school clearinghouse. To be a good ally, we need to support people when we hear them being the victim of ageism, and we need to call them out in a gentle and non-accusatory way when we hear them being ageist in their thinking and practices. So again, I think, what do you mean by that is a really good, it's much less aggressive than why. Why'd you call me young lady? I just want to smack people when they do that. But all that does is, fluster them. And when we put people on the defensive, they shut down instead of learning.
Yeah.
But to say, another thing to listen for is how they use the words old and young. People say, I'm too old for that. Perhaps. What they really mean is, I'm too lazy, I'm too smart, I'm too experienced, I'm too out of shape. Press them for the actual reason or the actual feeling that lies behind the blaming it on age, because age is never the reason. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah. One point that you made that resonated also was, instead of putting people on the defensive, you can give them a nudge.
Give them a nudge.
You can give them a nudge, or you can educate them. That's also how we. Sorry.
No. I got a question to my Is This Ageist blog from an older guy who said, my colleagues, I'm the oldest guy on the team, and they're always making references to age that are invariably derogatory of older age. And he said, I don't think they know they're doing it, and that it makes me feel lousy. And I think they are not. I agree. Almost all bias is unconscious. These are microaggressions. We know that racist microaggressions, sexist microaggressions, they are sort of small comments or gestures that make the member of that group feel disrespected or unheard. But we know how to call these things out. And you could say, someone suggested, well, say, if you don't want to lecture and preach, but you want to talk to your manager or to your colleagues, depending on the setup. And, this thing is happening that makes me feel this way. And you can be a little sneaky about it. You can say, I heard this woman named Ashton Applewhite, or I watched this TED Talk about ageism. And that, I went, gee, a light bulb went off. Maybe that's what's happening here. Instead of blaming them, see, I learned a name for this, or I learned about this thing, and I think that might be what's going on here. Could we talk about it?
Absolutely. So when we were developing the iShield.ai assistant, and we interviewed almost 2,500 people in terms of how would you like feedback when your content contains bias, right? Overwhelmingly, what people said was, almost 95% people said that if it is a nudge, they want to learn. Like it's unconscious. They don't know what
They don't know it. And if we don't call it out.
Correct. And they ask for other two things, which you also mentioned, is when we don't know, we get a nudge, but also explain why, so that we learn, right? So you need to surface that learning movement, that you explain why. Can you offer an alternative? So we heard these three things.
Right. In the workplace, you have a huge advantage, which is that you are working towards a common goal. You are trying to, make the company perform better, make a better product, do this thing together. You have a shared goal.
Yeah.
So think of it in that context. How can we do this thing better?
Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. And that became the features for our product to say, hey, you get a nudge in private, you get you surface a learning moment, you explain people why with references and training material, and you offer an alternative they can use. And when we offered this, again, as I told you, 95% of people whom we surveyed said, I would take that.
Yeah,
Right?
if you
So,
offer a way that has no shame,
yeah,
no blame, but
yeah,
just as, I mean, I really try not to use the word should. I mean, it would be nice if people tried to do better, but some, things resonate differently for different people, and we have to do this stuff in our own way and at our own speed. But
yeah.
we all need nudges to change the way we think, because these bias is deeply ingrained habit.
Do you have time to take one last question, Ashton?
I do.
Okay. So this is from Robin Smith. How can I prepare myself in the age of ageism as an interview candidate?
That's a great question, Robin. And let me say, first of all, that it's hard to get a job. And that, well, maybe not as hard as it used to be, thanks to the global labor shortage, but we're hard to land the dream job on the terms that we want. So no judgment about how you go about this. If you have to, to do whatever you need to do to get the job you want. That said, there is tremendous pressure, especially on older people, to leave early accomplishments off our resumes, to fudge our age. And when we do those things, they're not good for us because they're rooted in shame about something that shouldn't be shameful. And it is not legal for an employer to ask how old you are, to inquire about the date you graduated from college. That stuff is illegal. If you think your age is an obstacle, I think that if you feel that you can, and again, no shoulds, navigate this however feels right to you. But if you can say, I noticed that everyone in the front office is 8, and I have a lot of experience working with younger people. They can't name age as a problem, because then you could file for discrimination. But call it out and say, my previous manager was 20 years younger than I am, or whatever the situation is. I am comfortable in mixed age groups, or, if it's about your competence in some arena, fashion. There's this crazy idea that old people don't care about being fashionable. No truth to it. But if you're trying to work for a fashion label, mention your competence in that arena in a way that, references that what you're talking about. The problem with hiding our age or fudging it or leaving early accomplishments off our resume is that it gives a pass to the discrimination that makes those behaviors necessary. So what I want to say is, come out there and say, I'm 104 and I am great at what I do, and you're never going to find anyone better at it, but you probably won't get the job. So no judgment if you want to take that a little bit slower.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's all the time that we have today. There are a few more questions that have come up. We'll get back to them offline.
Great.
And thank you. I enjoyed a lot talking to you, learned a lot.
And thank you for the research that you do, because we need data and research to base these to base our findings on. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.